Not exactly my story, but it does include me. My mother told me this story from when I was a baby, about 2 years old, I believe. For some context, there was my father, my mother, two of my older brothers, and me. We just moved into a house for the first time, and it had an attic, main floor, and a basement. The basement contained the bedrooms. There was one specific room that had some steps, which basically made it slightly lower than the rest. It was the biggest room, so my eldest brother claimed it. After a week, my brother complained about the lack of sleep and did not like the room. He kept saying something felt off. My other brother asked to switch, since he always wanted the biggest room. A week later, the same thing happened to him. He can't sleep right, the room feels wrong, and he claims to see things in the dark. My mother believes that it might just be a placebo effect mixed with young children moving to a new home they aren't familiar with. She then moves me in the room instead. I was there for 3 days and would cry each time it was bedtime. I would wake up and scream my lungs out until I lost my voice. On the third day, after my father went to work and my brothers were getting ready for school, my mother decided to throw baby powder everywhere in the room. She would blast it on the floor everywhere, covering it all. Something felt off. She took off with me and my brothers. We had our day like usual. Once everyone got home, my mother went into my room. Traces of 3-clawed human-sized footprints were everywhere. The floor, the walls, and even the ceiling. My mother called my father in a frenzy at the sight. We moved out a week later. The door was locked during that time, and I was moved in my parents' room for the time being.
This story may be short, or it may be drawn out. I am recounting these events as I type, as it was honestly one of the most horrifying things I have experienced, and it brings me genuine stress to think about. This happened maybe 2-3 years ago. I live in southern West Virginia and have for my entire life. The woods and mountains surround every direction you look, and nighttime is a darkness that you can never dream of unless experienced. I was with a friend, I'll call him Mark. Mark was at my house one evening doing the usual things, watching UFC, playing Xbox, etc. It was extremely late when we finally got bored and decided to go for a walk on a nearby trail to smoke a joint. This is not a particularly long trail, but it is very dense in the woods that surround it, and it is easy to get freaked out when thinking of your surroundings. We finally get to about halfway into the trail, about 30 minutes in, where we stop, pack our joint, and stand on the trail to chill and talk. The forest is very alive tonight. There are always noises in the woods, but the amount of animal activity for the time was unsettling. At this point, it was probably past 1 a.m. This was strange and kind of eerie, but not alerting, as any sort of predatory animal in the area may cause a disturbance. We finish smoking and continue our walk when almost immediately the forest falls dead quiet. And as soon as the forest goes quiet, there was a voice. It almost sounds like a mocking, humanoid voice, shaky and uncertain, almost like an old children's toy, like the ones with the crackly speakers and robotic voice, if you know what I mean. This immediately sets us off. We bolt directly down the opposite length of the trail, but the sound does not gain distance. It doesn't get closer, per se, but no matter how far we ran down the trail, this eerie voice remains the same volume, going over and over with no quieting or stopping. At this point, I am convinced that we are in genuine danger, something I have felt very few times. Finally, after sprinting for who knows how long, we exit the trail, grasping for breath and almost at the verge of tears of how frightening this was. We begin to exit the trail, and about 5 minutes from the exit, there is a bone-shaking, heart-stopping, murderous scream from directly behind us. I know what a mountain lion sounds like. This was not an animal. This was not someone playing or watching a movie. This scream sent birds flying from nests and made my heart drop into my stomach. It was the most genuinely depraved and violent scream that I have ever heard. This is a true story that I have only told to maybe 3 people, all of whom seem to brush it off as false. I've never been a person to push for the existence of the paranormal or spiritual, but I genuinely believe I encountered something inhuman in those woods. Edit. I know I will receive questions such as what the voice was possibly saying or to explain the area and what happened after. I genuinely cannot remember what the voice was saying, if anything intelligible. I don't know if I could understand it then, and I certainly can't recall understanding it after several years of blocking it out of my memory. All that I recall is that it was a fluctuating voice in pitch, shaking, almost just joining sounds together. After running from the scream at the end of the trail, we ran to the car, which was only about 5 minutes from the trail, so we got there relatively fast from sprinting.
I work as a nurse in a post-surgical unit in the biggest hospital in my city. Patients come from hundreds of miles away to get their operations here. The surgeons are known to be the best. But what we don't tell the patients, what we're not supposed to tell them, is that there are ghosts here. Just like any other hospital, people pass away and their spirits sometimes linger, or maybe it is just a fragment of them that remains behind, something that science can't explain yet. There have been more than a few events that have raised the hair on the back of my neck, and some have sent me into hysterical screaming fits. But those types of reactions are frowned upon in the hospital, so I try to stay calm. There was that time a few months ago when a patient told me she felt like there were 3 other people in the wardroom with her, in each of the other 3 beds around her. They were talking back and forth and whispering, she said. But the weird thing was, she was alone in the 4-bedroom. I pulled back the curtains and showed her myself. All of the other beds were empty, and there were no visitors or staff in the room with her. As if that weren't disturbing enough, a few weeks later, a different patient said the exact same thing when she had been left alone in the same room. She described it exactly the same way, saying they were whispering back and forth and it was keeping her awake. I felt a chill up my spine when she told me that, but reassured her that the room was empty and she was simply imagining things. People have enough to worry about when they're recovering from surgery. We don't need them fretting about specters and ghosts when they should be worried about physio and discharge appointments, lifting restrictions and medication adjustments. So we keep these stories to ourselves. Some nurses said they couldn't sleep in a certain storage room during breaks on night shift since they'd had too many bad experiences there. When I asked them about it, they said they'd had bad dreams and felt like someone was in the room with them, standing over them while they slept. I didn't believe in those things myself, so I slept in there on the night shift and found out firsthand why nobody else wanted to use it as a nap room during breaks. I had the most realistic waking dream I'd ever had, where I'd awoken in the storage room and felt like someone was in there with me, watching me from the corner of the room, their dark outline visible in the dim room. When I went to turn on the lights, they didn't work, and the door wouldn't open, and for some reason in my dream, which seemed like reality, I chose to lie back down and go to sleep again, while the thing crept closer and closer, vanishing only to reappear just above me. It felt like my eyes were open the whole time, and I was forced to watch, paralyzed as it hovered over top of me. For what felt like hours, it was watching me while I slept, as I struggled and was unable to move. I finally came to my senses and finished my break early, going back to work and trying to forget about the horrible experience. But I refused to sleep in that storage room again. There was another event which haunts me to this day, especially since I'm heading in for a night shift right now, in just a few minutes. Another nurse told me a story on the night shift last week, and I've been thinking about it a lot since then, and it's been occupying my mind more and more, especially when I'm alone in the break room at night. We have a staff room where there are 2 small couches and a TV. Some nurses go in there to sleep during breaks on the night shift, and we try our best not to wake them up. She was sleeping on the couch there one night, and a bright light woke her up. There's an adjoining room with a bathroom and lockers, so she figured one of the nurses had gone in there and left the light on. She looked over at the door, she told me. You know how it has that little glass window and you can see through to the other side? Yeah, I said. I see it every day. So there's this woman on the other side of the door. And she's looking at me through the glass. I got shivers up my spine when she said this.
Maybe because it was the night shift. Maybe because that was where I was going on my break in an hour to sleep, or at least try to. And so I see her there, but she's not really looking at me. She's just kind of staring straight ahead. And the first thing I notice about her is her hair. It was in this very old-fashioned sort of style, not like anything you'd see today. It was like it was from the 70s or earlier, maybe. And she was wearing these funky blue pinstripe scrubs. And a nurse's cap. Nobody wears a cap anymore these days. And those scrubs, they looked like the ones, in the lobby, how they have those ones on display? From way back when. Yeah, they look just like that. I was nodding along, able to picture all of it, as if I was there with her. Another nurse walked in and heard us talking. "What are you guys talking about?" I said simply, "Ghosts." He scoffed. "You guys believe in that stuff?" The two of us shared a knowing look. He hadn't been working on the floor long enough to have seen them himself, and some people just aren't attuned to these things. The nurse went back to her story. "She's just standing there, staring straight ahead, and I thought it was the IV nurse at first because sometimes they'd come in during the night shift and use the bathroom or whatever. So I yelled at her, 'Hey, turn that light off, will ya? I'm trying to sleep in here.' But she just kept staring straight ahead. So I just put the pillow over my head and tried to sleep some more. Then when I woke up later on, and that light was still on. So I asked around. Nobody came in there during the night, and that room is locked, so it wasn't a patient. And I saw the IV nurse later on, and they were not dressed like that. So yeah, I'm pretty sure I know who it was, though." According to her, the woman was the ghost of a nurse who had died driving home after a long night shift and had fallen asleep at the wheel. Based on the description she had given, an older coworker had recognized her. She had said that was exactly what an old nurse who used to work there looked like. And from that point on, the nurse who told me this story always remembered to stay awake behind the wheel on the drive home. Every time my eyes start to blink and I'm getting tired, man, I think about that old nurse with the curly gray hair standing behind the glass, and I'm wide awake again. Better than a frickin' cup of coffee, I'll tell you. Something occurred to me as she finished the story. That's really weird. My patient in room 14 told me last night that they saw someone peeking their head in the room and looking at them, and sometimes they would stand in the doorway and just stare at them for a while. She said the person had a very old-fashioned haircut and old-fashioned scrubs. She thought it was a ghost or maybe a hallucination. Ghosts and hallucinations are commonplace on the post-surgical floor, and sometimes it can be difficult to tell the two apart. Pain medication-induced post-operative delirium is not unheard of, especially in the elderly. She thought it was the Dilaudid, so none of that tonight, just sticking with Tylenol. "Good idea," the other nurse said, and I excused myself. I figured I'd check on my patients, especially the ones in room 14. I was somewhat unsurprised to see a woman in blue pinstripe scrubs with a cap looking in at them from the doorway. Despite my terror, I began to walk on shaky legs down the hall towards her. She turned to look at me and went away from the patient's room, going down the side hall at the end of the unit. I ran to catch up with her, needing to see for myself who she was. When I got to the end of the hall, I looked to the left. She was gone. But it only been a few seconds. I ran down the short length of hallway to the next corridor. This other one was much, much longer. She could not have disappeared so quickly unless she went into a patient room. But again, she was gone. My heart hammering in my chest, I refused to believe it was a ghost. Such things didn't exist. They just couldn't. Room 9 was the only one she could have gone into in such a hurry. I went in and found all of the patients were wide awake despite the late hour of the night. It was 3 a.m. and everyone should have been sleeping. "It's freezing in here. Can you get me a warm blanket?" asked the patient by the door. I told her I would, and she nearly screamed in fright. "Oh my goodness," the old woman said, startled. "I didn't see you there." "So who were you talking to?" "The other nurse, the one who just came in. Where did she go?" I felt a presence behind me and looked to see the shape of something moving, but then it was gone, like a wisp of smoke on a windy day. Not wanting to tell the woman it was a ghost, I just made up an excuse and told the woman I'd get her a warm blanket. Nothing seemed to help, though. None of the patients in that room slept very well that night, if at all. They kept saying they felt like there was something laying in the bed right next to them. Come to think of it, it's the same room where patients kept imagining other people were in the room with them. Except this time, it really was full. I haven't seen the ghost nurse since that night, and I'm hoping I never do again. It's terrifying, to say the least, since I don't really understand why she's here, and you never know exactly when she's going to show up. I'm heading into work for another night shift now. Wish me luck. I'm going to need it.
I've told this story before, I think, but this is the right place for it. When I was a kid, we'd go to these beach cabins in Maryland, right by the Chesapeake. There were small, rustic ordeals with basic comforts, nothing fancy like TVs or air conditioning. 2 bedrooms and a cot in the kitchen, and my siblings and I rotated on the cot so that no one got too sore from it. A small tradition was that my mom and I would have a hot cup of tea before bed, in our summer jammies, and just our way of relaxing while everyone else went off to read or listen to music. Well, one night I was settling onto the cot when she picked up the tea kettle to fill it. Out of the corner of my eye, I see her flinch, then say in a steady voice, "What are you doing there?" My head whipped over to the kitchenette to see her looking out the window. Then she jumped back and started screaming for my father. Somehow he knew shit was getting real, ran from the back bedroom, and barely paused to see my mom point towards the left side of the house. He burst out the door and towards the left of the cabin. I'll be the first to admit I ran like a motherfucker and baseball slid under my parents' bed because, damn it, I was 10, and that's what kids do when they're terrified. I still remember the smell of the old wood and the feel of my teddy bear shielding me from whatever the hell was happening. I remember seeing my 14-year-old brother, then a medium-ranking karate student, following my dad out of the cabin at full speed. The rest of the story is an amalgamation of what I heard and what my family filled in for me. My father, a former Army sergeant and MP with a Bronze Star, managed to tackle the guy that had been peeping into our kitchen window. He put him in an elbow lock face down on the ground, my brother standing sentinel over both of them while my mom ran to get the cell phone we'd bought just 2 weeks earlier. This was in '95 when those suckers had cords and everything. While my mom called 911, I remember hearing the guy talking. He was saying things like, "The Ouija board fucking told me. I want the devil to suck my fucking brains out. Satan is in cabin 10. I have to get to cabin 10. The devil wants me to kill myself," and so on. We were in cabin 3, over half a mile from where he apparently intended to meet the devil. My dad kept a grip on him for probably a good 15 minutes until the cops showed up. The first thing out of the one's mouth was, "Jamie, when they let you out?" He'd been released from jail just 2 weeks earlier for arson. You know where he was standing when my mom was at the sink in the kitchen? Right beside the propane tank.